today is Abraham Lincoln's birthday, I want to read you a mini biography about Abraham Lincoln. I don't know if our history is copyrighted. I'm not going to show you the book I'm reading from. It's a history book. I don't know. I don't want to get in trouble. So you're looking at that book, which is also about slavery. That's a fantastic book about these people that were enslaved somewhere near the Ohio-Kentucky border, and they were like running to try to get to freedom, but they didn't know where freedom started and slavery ended. They were trying to get to Canada. Canada. Anyway, there is a book report on that book in the playlist called BookTube. Today I'm reading to you a mini biography about Abraham Lincoln. From 1809 to 1865. It says his greatest mission was to accomplish two things. First, to save his country from dismemberment and ruin. And second, to free his country from the great crime of slavery. Infinite wisdom has seldom sent any man into the world better fitted for the mission than Abraham Lincoln. That was a quote from Frederick Douglass. Now, in case you didn't know, Frederick Douglass was an American slave who wrote a book, The Narrative of an American Slave by Frederick Douglass, which is the book that totally got me back into reading. You know, like when you're in high school and stuff, you read, but then like life happens and you have a baby and then you have no time to read. So then you have to like get back into it. So Frederick Douglass is the author. He was a slave that got me back into the love of reading. I am reading today about Abraham Lincoln. He was the 16th and the tallest president. He was 6'4". He ranks as one of the greatest leaders, one of the noblest men. His birthday is today, February 12th, but it was back in 1809. Sorry. Okay. Hold on. It said, unlike aristocratic founding fathers, like his boyhood heroes, Washington and Jefferson, Lincoln was a backwoodsman. He was born on the dirt floor of a log cabin in a Kentucky, one room. He was the first president that was born outside of the original 13 colonies. He did have formal schooling between ages of 6 and 17. So I wonder if he was a victim of George Washington. Anyway, yet he did have some self-education. Through self-education, he became an eloquent speaker and a writer. He was very fine among the presidents. His commitment was to freedom and democracy. He was known as the savior of the Union and a great emancipator of enslaved Americans, even African descent. The secret to his success was his virtuous characters of honesty, integrity, love, justice, and courage, perseverance, humility, kindness, and humor. Now, this is probably going to be a really long study because I'm reading from... Okay, I'm not going to even read exactly. I'm going to take out some non-important words so that I don't get hit with copyright, because I do love this channel, and like I said, I don't think history is copyrighted. I don't. But the book says it is. I think the book is also a book that is like slaves, like they didn't want slaves to know certain things, so they put this copyright, I guess. But this is American history. So it says, okay, 17 years after the Pilgrims landed in Plymouth, a man named Samuel Lincoln. This was back in 1637. He was a weaver's apprentice of the Quakers, Quaker faith, and he moved from England to Massachusetts. There were 6 generations of his descendants that migrated westward, and they reached Illinois 2 centuries later in 1830. 21-year-old Abraham Lincoln moved to Illinois when he was 21, I guess. In 1859, Abraham Lincoln wrote an autobiographical sketch that said that he was born on February 12, 1809 in Hardin County, Kentucky. His parents were born in Virginia, just undistinguished families. His mother's name was Nancy, who died when he was 10 years old. She was of the family name of Hanks. He had a paternal grandfather who had the same name as him, Abe Lincoln. He immigrated from Rockingham County, Virginia, to Kentucky in about 1781, where a year or two later, he was killed by Indians by stealth, not even in battle, when he was laboring to open a farm in the forest. His ancestors, who were Quakers, went to Virginia from Berks County, Pennsylvania. He said his father died. His father's name was Thomas, died when he was only 6 years old, and he pretty much grew up without an education. He removed from Kentucky to Indiana in his 8th year, where they reached the new home. From that time, the state came into the Union. It was 1816. He said it was a wild area, many bears, wild animals. And at 21, he came to Illinois. He said he was 6 feet 4 inches, lean in flesh. He weighed on average 180 pounds with a darker complexion, coarse black hair, and his eyes were gray. In 1806, Thomas Lincoln married Nancy Hanks, and they lived on a 230-acre Mill Creek farm, and then moved 8 miles south to Elizabethtown, Kentucky, where Tom earned enough money as a carpenter and a cabinet maker. He bought 2 town lots. In 1807, Sarah was Lincoln's first child, was born in Elizabethtown in a log cabin. The Lincolns were not poor, according to the frontier standards. In 1808, Tom only paid $200 cash for a farm of 348 acres, increased his land holdings up to 586 acres, plus the new 2 town lots. The place was called Sinking Spring Farm. It was on Nolan Creek, southeast of Elizabethtown, 3 miles from Hodgens Mill, which is present-day Hogganville. And he lived in a log cabin near the spring, Sinking Spring. It says today it is a national park today. Abraham's birthplace is a National Historic Site. The address is 2995 Lincoln Farm Road, Hodgeville, Kentucky. Anyway, on today, February 12th, 1809, Nancy Hanks gave birth to a baby. She and Tom named Abraham after his grandfather. The proud father notified Betsy and Thomas Sparrow, Nancy's relatives, who lived nearby, with their 9-year-old son, Dennis Hanks, who was a foster from Nancy's cousin. Dennis was excited to have a new playmate. He and Abraham became close companions for decades. Dennis Hanks recalls Abraham's birth. He said that babies weren't very common in the blackberry woods of Kentucky. Mother, it's a baby, let's see. In 1809 to 1811, the young Abraham, he was living on Nolan's Creek, Sinking Spring. Him and his sister Sarah, who was 2 years older, they were playing in this limestone spring. In 1809, Kentucky had only been a state for 17 years. Stores were just scattered. The Lincolns learned to live resourcefully off these frontier farmers. Food came from mostly corn and hunting, deer, elk, and bear. They also had wild berries, cherries, hazelnuts, walnuts. Their log cabin was built from white oak and other hardwood trees. The clothing was flax and wool. Family wore Woolsey Lindsay clothing made of linen and wool spun by Nancy herself, as well as buckskin. Walnut shells served as buttons to make brown dye. Knob Creek Farm. Okay, it says in 1811, Abraham was 2. The Lincolns moved 10 miles northeast to a fertile farm on Knob Creek. They were there 5 years. Tom Lincoln Jr. was born, but he did die in infancy. Abraham's earliest recollection was of Knob Creek. The farm was composed of 3 fields laying in a valley surrounded by high hills and deep gorges. The Louisville-Nashville-Cumberland Road passed right by the cabin. It offered Abe a window to the world. By the day his family worked, by night they listened to Nancy read the Bible. They attended Little Mount Baptist Church. There is a replica of Lincoln's Knob Creek home, his boyhood home, on US 31 East, Hodgenville, Kentucky. The frontier life was fun. The work. Dennis Hanks was Abraham's cousin, recalled that Abraham was right out in the woods as soon as he was weaned, pretty much. He was fishing in the creek, going on hunts with Tom and the dogs, looking to find bee trees, trapping, looking for fur, I guess. It says his father suffered greatly, Abraham's father suffered greatly for the want of education, and he was determined at an early date that he was going to be well educated. There were schools, but no qualification was required of the teachers beyond reading, writing, says ciphering. There was nothing exciting, nothing ambition. He went to school for littles. He's at 6, 7, 11, 14. The tuition was run by these individual hustlers, I guess, whatever. Anyway, Abraham never did forget his first teacher. His name was Zachariah Riney. He did run a schoolhouse. It was a blab school, B-L-A-B, I don't know what that means. They learned by repetition, and they were studying to avoid the hickory switch. So they were only studying so they wouldn't get beat. I thought maybe he was a victim of George Washington. In 1816, Indiana, Abraham was 7. The Lincolns moved 100 miles northwest to Indiana. It was a 2-week journey through the thick forest across the Ohio River. Lincoln said there was difficulty with land titles in Kentucky, partly on account of slavery. Right. I guess slaves can't make contracts. Contracts are no good if they're slaves. Unlike Kentucky, Indiana was free. Indiana was a free state, unlike Kentucky. Anyway, Indiana having been created from the Northwest Territory, where the Northwest Ordinance prohibited slavery. Bullshit. In 1816, the United States was only about 40 years old when the Lincolns settled in Indiana on the 160 acres of land near Little Pigeon Creek. It was a 25 square mile community with log cabins. There was 27 other pioneer families. To encourage the settlement of the wilderness frontier, the U.S. government offered these pioneers the right to buy land for $2 an acre if they would settle there and work the land. Thomas acquired the land this way. 40 families had settled in this 6 square miles of Lincoln's. By 1822, within a 1-mile radius, there was 9 families, and 49 children. Abraham Lincoln lived briefly in a 3-sided shelter called a half-face camp. And he helped Tom build a cabin, 20 by 18, one room, and a loft. In 1817, the Sparrows and Dennis Hank moved nearby. You can visit that national park. It's Lincoln's boyhood home is Lincoln City, Indiana National Memorial. In 1818, Abraham was only 9 when tragedy struck. Nancy died of a sickness she got from milk, as had the Sparrows weeks earlier. Milk caused by poisoned milk from cows that ate a plant. They were blaming the cows eating a plant called white snake root. It was the saddest day of his life. He had to help build a coffin and bury his own mother. In 1819, the next year, Tom was now 41, went to Kentucky to propose an acquaintance from Elizabethtown, Sally, her name was Sarah Johnson, 31. She was also a widow, 3 kids, 5, 7, and 9, but she declined because she had some debts. Thomas paid her debts, and they did marry in December. Thomas returned home with Sally and her children, and they introduced him to Abraham. Sarah was 12, Abraham was 10. Abraham's stepmother was kind and loving, made a wonderful home for the 5 children. Dennis Hanks had moved in with them. 8 people now lived in this one room. Abraham's and his stepmother, Sally, they laughed and joked together, sometimes played around. She teased him about growing so tall. He was 6 foot at age 16. Abe was fond of sports and jokes and fun and wits. He never drank whiskey. He was temperate in all things. He never told a lie. He never quarreled. He never swore. He never evaded. Abraham Lincoln went to school, I guess, in Indiana. At age 11, it was now 1820, Abraham went for 3 months to the log cabin school of Andrew Crawford, who taught, in addition to the 3 R's, reading, writing, and reckoning, by having students practice introductions. Introductions. At 1826, at age 17, Abraham walked and rode a horse 4 miles to Azell, Dorsey. He practiced writing, very fine, clean, clear script, patterning his handwriting on George Washington and Thomas Jefferson's. He wrote essays in classes about cruelty to animals. He did shoot a turkey, but then resolved never to kill animals again. Abraham did win a spelling match with his rival Caddy Roby, stumbled on a word. Abraham was good at arithmetic. Logic was important to Abraham. He thought about things until they made sense to him. There are some books that shaped his life. It says, there are things I want to know. The things that I want to know are in books. My best friend is the man who get me a book I ain't read. Abraham Lincoln. That's a quote from him at age 13. And when I was a boy in Indiana, I borrowed and read every book I could hear of for 30 miles round. Abraham Lincoln. Anyway, once he learned how to read books and newspapers, it was a wide open new world for him, transporting him beyond the Indian frontier. His family owned a few books, but he became hooked on reading. He walked miles just to borrow a book and read it. Some books sparked his imagination and fed his hunger. Some taught him about public speaking and made him laugh. The books that inspired him, there's a couple of them here. I read this first one. It's John Bunyan's The Pilgrim Progress. And I'm telling you, there's a book report on, it's 2 book reports on that book on the BookTube channel playlist. That book will, that's from like the 1600s. That book is like, kind of like, Dante, where he and Beatrice be going through the different realms of hell. Well, this is like, John Bunyan's is like the different realms of this place, Earth. And who you meet along the way, Mr. Worldly Wise Man, Mr. Opportunist. Anyway, John Bunyan's The Pilgrim Progress inspired Lincoln. Daniel Defoe, Robinson Crusoe, and Arabian Nights, which I think I was just listening to one of that Sinbad stuff. Anyway, Abraham borrowed a book on geography, history. It just expanded his knowledge. He did, I guess, fall for the solar system scam, though. I don't know. It says solar system. Abraham learned how to put his message across. It says Abraham learned the virtues and gained more speaking practice imitating ancient orators. Plutarch was a noble lives of ancient Greek and Romans. And then it says J. Quinn's Jest. Abraham carried that book with him constantly. The humorous stories became part of his life. You'll have to check that one out. Folks would hang around Abraham for hours listening to him spin these funny yarns. Funny guy. Funny guy. Oh, more books that shaped his life include the King James Bible, Aesop's Fables, Shakespeare's dramatic works was one of his favorites. As a youth, he read them over and over. They remained a constant companion as an adult. Their literary styles reflecting fables, parables, metaphors, cadence, parallelism, and humor. They just marked his own speech and writing. Moral lessons of integrity, love, justice, courage, kindness, humility. It was just a profound influence on the human nature of his character. He learned morals from the Bible. In 1865, he was president. Abraham kept Shakespeare's plays on his desk, read them frequently. He identified with Hamlet's fatalism. Abraham's parents were Baptists, but they didn't really join a church. He couldn't really reconcile with the bitter rivalry he saw amongst the religious groups. Aesop's Fables was, I guess, a book from 550 BC. It says Aesop was born a slave in Phrygia, a country in Asia Minor. It was during the golden age of ancient Greece. His wisdom won him freedom, and he became a philosopher who taught morals and the truths about the universe through fancy stories. Abraham learned the value of honesty through the fable that was called The Shepherd Boy and the Wolf. William Shakespeare's dramatic works, he read those when he was in Indiana. Lessons in Elocution, Elocution, Elocution. Not sure what that means. Abraham kept a Bible on his desk when he was president. I wonder if anybody keeps the Constitution on their desk. How about more books. Abraham's met the founding fathers. They became his lifelong heroes through these books. The biography of George Washington by a man called Parson M.L. or M.L. Parson became his favorite book, inspired him for public speaking. When he was the president-elect in 1861, he was described to the New Jersey Senate, the book's impact on him. Oh, here we go. The Declaration of Independence, 1776. He loved that one. He first read that at age 17 was when Thomas Jefferson died. 3 decades later, the president-elect Lincoln described his feelings at Independence Hall in Philadelphia. Abraham Lincoln often read a book about Benjamin Franklin's autobiography and how his methods of self-improvement. Lincoln gave advice to G.E. Pickett. The advice was, remember, falsehood is the worst enemy a fellow can have. Truth is your truest friend, no matter what the circumstances are. He was raised with farm work that he worked until he was 22. Abraham read in the morning and before work. Despite reading from ages 8 to 21, Abraham worked hard. When not farming, he usually had an axe or a maul in his hand, clearing out the forest, splitting logs. He was 6'4", and he could do the work of 3 men with an axe. Sometimes Tom hired Abraham out to the neighbors. He was working for 25 cents a day, doing some work on the neighbors' farms. In 1828, Abraham saw his first big city. He was 19 when he went to New Orleans, when James Gentry hired him to help, a flatboat of produce down the Ohio and Mississippi rivers. They were trying to sell it in New Orleans. Abraham saw things on this boat, including black slave markets. People being sold like cattle. There was 200 slave traders in New Orleans. Anyway, for his 3-month job going down the river, he only got $24. In 1830, in Illinois, he was searching for a better land to avoid this new outbreak of milk sickness. Once again, he moved his family to Decatur, Illinois. Abraham's sister died, Sarah, in 1828, and he recalled having to rescue his dog, who couldn't make it across the icy stream. Abraham was now 21, and he was no longer legally bound to contribute to his parents. He was no longer legally bound to contribute labor or wages. But he did stay a year in Decatur, and he helped them to build a cabin and plant corn. And at age 22, he went off on his own. He moved to New Salem for 6 years, and then to Springfield. In 1844 was a homecoming. Abraham composed a poem. I don't know if this is a poem right here. It says, in the fall of 1844, I went into the neighborhood in that state which I was raised, where my mother and sister were buried, and from which I had been absent about 15 years. The part of the country is, within itself, and unpoetical as any spot on earth, but still seeing it as its objects and inhabitants aroused feelings in me which were certainly poetry. Through whether my expression of those feelings is poetry, it's quite another question. Oh, this is the poem, maybe. Let me read you the poem. It's my childhood home. I'm not going to read it. I'm going to make another video about the poem. I'll keep with this history, okay? In New Salem, Illinois, he was 22 to 28. It was 1831, and he was free to make his way in the world. Abraham wondered what he would become. He was thinking maybe a steamboat captain in Mississippi River life. Intrigued him. He wanted maybe a blacksmith. But he did not want to be a rail-splitting farmer. As luck would have it, a businessman named Denton Offutt offered him a job clerking in New Salem. He worked in a bluff overlooking the Sangamon River, New Salem, Illinois, 1831. He didn't have any he didn't have any money, I guess. He was described as a penniless, which is weird because he saw a penny. Anyway, Abraham would leave Springfield in 1837. He left a respected lawyer and a member of the Illinois legislature. Those 6 years in New Salem were the most formative of his adult life. New Salem had society that was 3 groups: ruffians, intellectuals, and the people in between. Abraham first encountered the ruffians. He called them the Clary Grove Boys. They ruled the village. They respected only physical strength. Their leader was Jack Armstrong. He earned his rank by fighting everybody else. Denton Offutt bragged to Bill Clary about this new store clerk named Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln did not want to fight, but he had no choice. And on Saturday, there was a big fight. Everyone in New Salem came to watch, and they bet on Jack. Jack fought dirty, stomping Abraham's foot. Abraham lifted him, shook him, and threw him in the dirt, I guess. The angry Clary Groves gang rushed Abraham, but they held him back. Jack and the gang respectfully acknowledged Abraham as the new leader. They admired him even after they discovered his strange traits, that he reads books and he didn't smoke or drink or swear, and he was honest. Before Abraham, they considered those traits to be sissy. Abraham's log college. The way for a young man to rise is to improve himself, says Abe Lincoln. Intellectuals was a gift of spinning funny yarns popularly to everyone in New Salem. It took him longer to make friends with the intellectuals because they linked him up with the ruffians. He joined the intellectuals in a New Salem debate society and surprised them with the force and logic of his first debate. Abraham was aware of his defective education that he got from George Washington. New Salem's outstanding schoolmaster teach him grammar. Mentor Graham said that English Grammar, 1828, by Samuel Kirkshan, was the best textbook. Abe walked 8 miles to borrow a copy of it. He learned punctuation, diagramming speech, eloquent words, public speaking, morals, good writing. 24-year-old Abraham studied with the 33-year-old Mentor Graham in the woods. Abraham worked hard to rid himself of the frontier speech pattern. Provincialism, it says. Later, Graham wrote, Lincoln came into the house for the first time. He walked straight to the bookshelves. In 1861, when Lincoln was inaugurated President of the United States, Mentor Graham sat on the platform. He was his teacher. His master teacher is proud to have his pupil eloquent speech moving the human race forward through constructive thought and convincing expressions. Abraham Lincoln's Illinois legislature and his military service, every man is said to have his peculiar ambition. I have no other so great as that of being truly esteemed of my fellow men, said Abraham Lincoln in his 1832 election speech. In March of 1832, Abraham decided to run for the Illinois House of Representatives. Why not? Offa's store had failed. He was out of the job. George Washington's life inspired him to be towards public service. He kept up with politics through the newspapers. Black Hawk War interrupted his campaign. 90 days of militia service he had to enlist in. It was a war against the Chief Black Hawk and 500 Sac and Fox Indians who tried to take over Illinois' homeland that they signed away in a treaty in 1831. The Indians claimed you can't sell land. Nothing. You can't carry away land. Abraham company was mostly New Salem men, including Clary Grove boys, these ruffians, and they elected him captain. They lined up behind him. Honor gave him more pleasure than anything else. In Abe's first and only military service, he learned a lot. One day, marching his men 20 abreast towards the gate, the capture of Black Hawk brought a quick end to the war. Abraham, he only seen one Indian whose life was saved. Having battled mosquitoes, he returned home for his legislative candidacy. In 1834, Abraham did win the election in Illinois' House of Representatives as a Whig Party, W-H-I-G. He set a high standard for campaigning. He won re-election in 1836, 1838, and 1840. He served with distinction. In 1836, he became the Whig leader in the House, along with 9 other legislators, all 6 from the Sangamon County. They masterminded moving the capital from Vandalia to Springfield. Abraham liked being a politician and was proud to be one. They called him Honest Abe. Here's a quote from him in 1848. "I planted myself upon the truth, and the truth only, so far as I knew it, or could be brought to know it." Oh, Abraham Lincoln, 1858. "Some things are legally right, but not morally right," 1848. So Abraham was a self-educated backwoodsman, and he became a successful state politician. He was honest, strong reputation for being honest. Honest Abe was his election slogan. 1832, he was a store clerk. In 1833, he was a merchant. It says it was after the Black Hawk War. Abraham bought a store. He bought it on credit, bought it in a partnership with a man named William Berry. Neither really had a talent for business. Berry was drinking the profits. They were selling whiskey and he was drinking it. So the store didn't work out. Berry died. Abraham was left with the entire debt, which was only $1,100. But instead of skipping town, which was a common practice, he asked for his creditors for time to pay. In 1833, he was a postmaster. Abraham found work as a surveyor. Graham helped him. The New Salem postmaster, infrequently a postal agent, came to collect the postal money. In 1837, it says, ambitious lawyer. He wanted more than anything. He feared that he had a lack of education, even though he went to school. He didn't have enough sense. He was afraid that they would think that. But he was encouraged by the Springfield lawyer John Stewart. He borrowed law books. He studied on his own, and he earned his license in 1837. In 1835 to 1849, he was a politician, 8 years as the Illinois legislature, 2 years as a U.S. congressman. He set a high standard. Whig Party of Illinois. A quote says, "I have studied law and removed to Springfield to practice it." In April 1837, he began to practice law with John Stewart, continued serving the Illinois legislature. The population of Springfield was 2,000. It was a big city compared to New Salem, and it was the new capital, owing largely to Abraham's influence. Abraham rode into Springfield on a horse with all his belongings, 2 saddlebags. His total wealth was $7. Unlike his entry into New Salem 6 years earlier, he now had a profession and a direction in life, and he did practice law 2.5 decades with John Stewart until 1841, Stephen Logan until 1844, William Billy Herndon until 1861. Then he found lodging with a young merchant named Joshua Speed. Merchants and politicians were gathered at the store to spin yarns and argue about politics. Lincoln's Whigs favored a strong central government. He had new friendships, but he was lonely. He missed Anne Rutledge, who was a New Salem friend, whose death was in 1835. It saddened him. In May of 1837, he impulsively proposed to Mary Owens, a visitor to New Salem from Kentucky. But he really didn't like her, and he regretted proposing, but he felt his honor to keep his word. He wrote again, "If it suits you, you better not answer this farewell, long life." To his surprise, Mary rejected him. So, well, you know, he didn't want her anyway. Mary Todd. I warned Mary that she and Mr. Lincoln were not suitable. They were different in nature and education. They had no feelings alike. Abraham resolved not to marry. Couldn't withstand the blue-eyed charms of the aristocrat Mary Todd. She was only 5'2", well-educated daughter of Levi Todd, who helped found Kentucky. Mary moved to Springfield from Lexington, Kentucky, to live with her sister and her brother-in-law. They were Elizabeth and Ninian Edwards. Ninian was a respected legislator, and Edwards was among the Springfield social elite. Joshua Speed brought Abraham to a party at the mansion, Edwards Mansion, and Abraham found that Stephen Douglas, his Democratic Party rival, was known as the Little Giant, 5'4", was his romantic rival even. Who would Mary choose? Elizabeth said Mary loved power and show and was the most ambitious woman. She used to contend with her friends in Kentucky that she was going to marry a president. In 1840, the far-sighted Mary chose Abraham, and in 1858, Douglas would defeat Lincoln in the Senate race, but Lincoln would defeat Douglas in the presidential race in 1860. Abraham and Mary became engaged. Abraham realized he'd made another mistake, and he wrote Mary that he didn't love her long enough. He tried to break off on the engagement. On January 1st, 1841, Abraham called the fatal first. He did break the engagement off. On November 4th, 1842, in a ceremony at Edwards' home, Lincoln ended up recovering the marriage, renewed it with her, and got married. A week later, Lincoln ended a business letter with his new clients. In 1844, after 18 months in the boarding house, Abraham and Mary did move into a nice home. Jackson and 8th Street, lived there till 1861. They shared deep love for their children, who grew into adulthood, Willie and Tad, and they would be the first presidential children to live in the White House. I guess they had 4 kids. They had Tad. His name was Thomas. He was born in 1853. Willie was born in 1850. Eddie, 1846, but he died at age 4. And Robert, 1843. Robert did become a Harvard graduate and a successful lawyer. Eddie died at age 4. Willie was the favorite child. His death was in the White House at 11. It devastated them. It drove Abraham and Mary to the brink of mental illness. And then Tad was hyperactive child, it says. And he died in Chicago at 18. Oh my God. Anyway, Billy Herndon was Abraham's law partner. Abraham was none too neat at the office, evidenced by his littered desk. There was orange seeds all over the dusty corners. He kept up with the papers by filing them in a hat. At home, neither Mary or Abraham were easy to live with. Abraham was reading on the floor out loud. Mary had temper tantrums. Mary really didn't mix up good with her in-laws. In 1851, Thomas Lincoln was dying, but they didn't even go visit him because Mary was ill. Abe didn't even go to his dad's funeral. Abraham practiced law in Springfield for 24 years, starting out as a self-taught beginner in 1837. He became one of the most successful, sought-after, respected trial lawyers in Indiana. In 1855, Lincoln shared his key to success, self-reliance, he said, honesty, temperance, clear, concise language, storytelling and jokes, respect for the law. Lincoln's success was rooted in his firm belief in rule of law. In 1838, he was addressing mob violence. He said, "Let every American, every lover of liberty, swear by the blood of the Revolution never to violate the laws of the country, never to tolerate their violation by others. Let every man remember that to violate the law is to trample the blood of his father. Let reverence for the laws be taught in school, be preached from the pulpit, proclaimed in legislative halls, and enforced in courts of justice. And in short, let it become the political religion of the nation. Let me not be understood as saying there's no bad laws. I mean to say no such thing, but I do mean to say that although bad laws should be repealed as soon as possible, while they still continue in force for the sake of example, they should be religiously observed." Abraham Lincoln's national politics, 1847. In 1847, in Washington, D.C., Lincoln won the election as a Whig to the U.S. House of Representatives, and he served one term. In Congress, Lincoln took an unpopular stance by opposing the Mexican War, and he challenged President James Polk to prove that he had not unconstitutionally started the war, but the president ignored him. Back in Illinois, the people who supported the war accused Lincoln of being unpatriotic. Even his law partner did. Abraham wrote that the Constitution gave war-making powers to Congress, not to the president, and that it's that way for a good reason. In 1849, after a disappointing term, Lincoln returned home, feeling that he accomplished very little in Congress, where the dominating issue was the slavery in the new Western territories that was acquired by the Mexican War. Lincoln supported the Wilmot Proviso, which prohibited the extension of slavery, but it failed to pass. He had failed to gain support for his bill to prohibit slavery in Washington, and he failed to win recognition in the Whig Party. In 1849, Springfield, Illinois, he was convinced that he had no more future in politics, and he resumed practicing law in Springfield in the 8th Judicial District Court, to which he had other lawyers traveled there for 6 months. In 1854, there was the Kansas-Nebraska Act, which caused Lincoln to re-enter national politics and determined to stop the spread of slavery. He was thunderstruck because of this act, which legalized slavery in an area protected from slavery since the Missouri Compromise in 1820.